Elena Reyes hurried through the back entrance of Le Ciel, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. She was running late again, not because she'd overslept or lost track of time, but because her mother's nurse had called in sick. She'd spent the morning making sure her mom took her medication, ate breakfast, and was comfortable before her neighbor could come over to help. "You're cutting it close," said Miguel, one of the other waiters, as Elena rushed to her locker to change into her uniform. I know. How's the lunch crowd today?" Elena asked, quickly tying her dark hair back into a neat bun while glancing at her watch. She had exactly 3 minutes before the floor manager would start his pre-shift inspection. "Rich and demanding, as usual," Miguel replied with a half-smile. "Mr. Harrison sent back his steak twice, and Mrs. Bernstein is complaining that her water doesn't have the right amount of lemon." Elena nodded, having heard it all before. In the 2 years she'd worked at Le Ciel, she'd learned that wealth didn't always come with patience or kindness. Some of the restaurant's regular customers treated the staff like they were invisible, while others seemed to enjoy finding flaws in everything, just to remind everyone of their importance. "Table 12 specifically asked for you," Miguel added, raising an eyebrow. "Some big shot and his business partners." Elena sighed. "Great. Just what I need today." As she finished buttoning up her crisp white shirt and smoothed down her black skirt, Elena caught a glimpse of her hands. Despite the expensive hand cream she splurged on occasionally, her fingers showed the beginning signs of the rough, dry skin that came with constant dishwashing and cleaning. Those same fingers had once danced across piano keys with such grace that her music teacher had called them magic. Now they carried trays and polished silverware. The floor manager, Richard, appeared at the door. "Elena, you're here, good. Table 12 is waiting. And they're not the patient type." "On my way," Elena said, quickly applying a touch of lip balm, the only makeup she had time for. As she walked through the kitchen, Elena took a deep breath and put on her professional smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes but was convincing enough for customers who rarely looked at her face anyway. She had gotten good at becoming what people expected: efficient, pleasant, and forgettable. Table 12 was in the corner by the window, offering one of the best views of Central Park. 4 men in expensive suits sat around it, their conversation pausing as Elena approached. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Welcome to Le Ciel. My name is Elena and I'll be taking care of you today," she said, her voice slipping into the polished, slightly formal tone she used for work. The man at the head of the table looked up at her, his expression briefly curious before returning to something more neutral. He was younger than the others, maybe in his late 30s, with dark hair and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. "We'll start with a bottle of the 2005 Chateau Margaux," he said without looking at the wine list. "And we're in a bit of a hurry, so we'll order now." Elena nodded and took their orders efficiently, noting how none of them hesitated at the prices or asked about specials. As she turned to leave, she overheard one of them mention something about a $50 million acquisition, as casually as most people might discuss buying coffee. Back in the kitchen, as she waited for the sommelier to bring the wine, Elena felt a familiar heaviness settle over her. 5 years ago, her life had been so different. She had been studying piano performance at Juilliard on a partial scholarship, her days filled with music and dreams of concert halls. Her mother, a high school music teacher who had sacrificed everything to nurture Elena's talent, had been her biggest supporter. Then came the diagnosis. Her mother's multiple sclerosis had progressed rapidly, forcing her to stop working. Elena's father had left when she was 7, and there was no other family to help. The choice hadn't really been a choice at all. Elena withdrew from school to care for her mother and find work. At first, she had tried to keep playing, practicing on an old upright piano in their apartment when her mother was asleep. She'd even managed to teach a few students and play at a small bar on weekends. But as her mother's medical bills piled up and their savings dwindled, Elena had taken on more shifts, first at a cafe near their apartment, then at a chain restaurant, and finally at Le Ciel, where the tips were better but the hours were longer. Now at 26, her dreams of becoming a concert pianist seemed like something from another life. She hadn't touched a piano in 8 months. The last time had been at a regular customer's house party where she'd been hired to help serve. She had spotted a beautiful baby grand in the corner and, during a quiet moment, had allowed herself just a few minutes to play. The feeling of the keys beneath her fingers had been both comforting and painful. a reminder of everything she had lost. "Elena." "Your wine is ready?" called the sommelier, pulling her back to the present. She carried the expensive bottle to table 12, going through the ritual of presentation and pouring with practiced ease. As she served them, she couldn't help but notice the man at the head of the table watching her more closely than customers usually did. "Have we met before?" he asked suddenly as she finished pouring. "I don't believe so, sir," Elena replied, keeping her professional smile in place. "James Whitaker," he said, extending his hand, an unusual gesture from a customer to a server. Surprised, Elena shifted the wine bottle to her left hand and briefly shook his. "Elena Reyes. Reyes, are you related to Mariela Reyes, the music teacher from Franklin High?" Elena's composure slipped for a moment. "She's my mother." Something like recognition flashed in his eyes. "I thought so. There's a resemblance. She was passionate about music. Drove us all crazy, making us learn about classical composers when we just wanted to play pop songs." "You were her student?" Elena asked, momentarily forgetting her role. "Many years ago," he replied with a slight smile. "She talked about her daughter, the piano prodigy." "That's you, I assume?" The other men at the table were beginning to look impatient, and Elena felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "Yes, well, your appetizers will be out shortly," she said, quickly retreating to the kitchen. For the rest of their meal, Elena felt James Whitaker's eyes on her occasionally, making her uncomfortably aware of the growing distance between who she had been and who she was now. She served them with perfect professionalism, but inside, a storm of emotions threatened her carefully maintained calm. As they finished their meal, Whitaker requested the check directly from her instead of signaling to Richard as most VIP customers did. "How is your mother doing?" he asked as she processed his credit card. "She's stable," Elena replied, the word inadequate for describing her mother's daily struggles. "No longer teaching, though." He nodded, signing the receipt with a flourish. The tip was generous but not extravagant, exactly the right amount to show wealth without showing off. "I'm hosting a private dinner at my home this Friday," he said, handing her a business card. "6 people, very informal. I'd like to request you specifically to serve." "The restaurant allows that, yes?" "Sometimes for regular customers," Elena said carefully. Lucille did occasionally loan out staff for private events hosted by their most elite patrons, with the restaurant taking a cut of the fee. "I'll call your manager to arrange it," Whitaker said. "The pay will be worth your while." As table 12 left, Elena stared at the business card in her hand. James Whitaker, CEO, Whitaker Tech Innovations. She recognized the company name from news articles about rising tech startups. The extra money from a private event would help with this month's rent, which was already late. Later that night, as Elena heated up soup for her mother in their small apartment in Queens, she found herself telling the story of her unexpected encounter. "James Whitaker?" her mother asked, her voice weaker than it had been a month ago, but her mind still sharp. "Tall boy, serious eyes, never smiled enough?" Elena nodded, surprised by her mother's clear recollection. "He was talented but never practiced. Always looking for shortcuts," her mother said, a hint of her former teacher's sternness returning. "But he was kind when it mattered. His mother died during his senior year, and he still wrote me a thank you note after graduation." "Well, he's very rich now," Elena said, helping her mother with the spoon when her hands trembled too much to hold it steadily. "And you're serving him dinner," her mother replied, a sadness in her eyes that made Elena look away. "Life has strange turns." "It's just temporary, Mom," Elena said, the same thing she'd been saying for years now. "Once your new treatment starts working and things stabilize, you'll go back to your music," her mother finished for her. "I know, dear." They both knew it wasn't true. The new treatment was expensive, even with insurance, and there was no guarantee it would work better than the previous ones. Elena's dreams of returning to Juilliard had faded long ago, replaced by more immediate concerns: making rent, paying for medications, keeping her mother comfortable. After her mother fell asleep, Elena sat by the window of their apartment looking out at the city lights. She found herself doing something she hadn't done in months, moving her fingers in the air, playing an invisible piano, feeling the ghost of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Her hands remembered what her mind tried to forget, that once music had been as natural to her as breathing. The business card from James Whitaker sat on the table beside her. Friday's private dinner would pay well, and they desperately needed the money. Yet something about the way he had looked at her, with recognition of who she had been, not just who she was now, left her feeling exposed. Elena closed her eyes and let her hands fall still. Tomorrow would bring another double shift, more demanding customers, more pretending that this life was enough. But for just a moment, she allowed herself to remember the feeling of sitting before a piano, the world falling away as her fingers brought beauty into being. Then, with a deep breath, she put those memories away again. There was no use dwelling on what couldn't be changed. She had bills to pay and a mother who needed her. Music, like so many dreams, would have to wait. Friday evening arrived faster than Elena had expected. The past few days at the restaurant had been a blur of orders, demanding customers and long hours on her feet. She'd picked up an extra lunch shift to make up for the time she'd be spending at Whitaker's dinner party, leaving her exhausted but grateful for the extra tips. "Are you sure about this?" her mother asked as Elena got ready in their small bathroom, applying a touch of mascara and lip gloss. It was more makeup than she usually wore for work, but private events at a client's home were different from the restaurant. "It's good money, Mom," Elena replied, smoothing down her hair. 6 hours of work for what I'd make in 2 full days at Le Ciel. Her mother watched her from the doorway, leaning on her walker. "I don't like the idea of you serving that man in his home. There's something off about it." Elena smiled at her mother's protective instinct. Mr. Whitaker seemed perfectly professional. Besides, Richard will be there too. The floor manager had been assigned to oversee the event, as was standard practice for Le Ciel's private functions. "Just be careful," her mother said softly. "People with money sometimes think they can buy anything or anyone." "I'm just serving dinner, Mom," Elena said, kissing her mother's cheek. "And Miss Porter from next door will be here with you until I get back." The taxi ride to James Whitaker's penthouse in Upper East Side took longer than expected due to Friday evening traffic. Elena watched the buildings grow more impressive as they drove deeper into one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. When they finally arrived at Whitaker's building, she felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. The doorman eyed her Le Ciel uniform and directed her to the service entrance with barely concealed disdain. As she rode up in the service elevator, Elena reminded herself that this was just another job. The only difference was the location. Richard was already there when she arrived, directing the 2 other servers and a bartender in the massive kitchen. "You're late," he said, checking his watch. "Traffic," Elena explained, quickly putting on the white serving gloves required for private events. "Mr. Whitaker asked about you specifically," Richard said, lowering his voice. "Apparently you made quite an impression at the restaurant. Remember, these are important clients for Le Ciel. Whatever they want, they get, within reason, of course." Elena nodded, feeling uncomfortable with the attention. "What's on the menu tonight?" 8-course tasting menu. Chef Pascal is handling everything himself," Richard replied, gesturing to the renowned head chef of Le Ciel, who had been brought in for the occasion. "You'll be serving Mr. Whitaker and his guests directly." The penthouse was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a design magazine. As Elena helped prepare the dining room, she noticed a large grand piano in the corner of the living room. It was clearly expensive, its polished black surface gleaming under the recessed lighting. Her fingers itched at the sight of it, a physical reaction she couldn't control. It had been so long since she'd played anything other than the cheap keyboard she kept hidden under her bed. That piano probably cost more than she would make in 10 years. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said behind her. Elena turned to find James Whitaker watching her, dressed casually but expensively in what looked like a simple sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Yes, it is?" she replied professionally, stepping away from the piano. "The dining room is almost ready for your guests, sir. Steinway Model D," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Concert Grand. The same model used at Carnegie Hall." The mention of Carnegie Hall stung more than it should have. Once she had dreamed of playing there. "Do you play, Mr. Whitaker?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation polite and impersonal. "Barely," he said with a slight smile. "I keep it mostly for show, I'm afraid. A symbol of culture I don't actually possess." Elena wasn't sure how to respond to his unexpected honesty. "But you play, don't you?" he asked, his eyes studying her with unusual intensity. "My mother mentioned your talent often." I used to, Elena said shortly, uncomfortable with the personal turn of the conversation. Your guests should be arriving soon. Is there anything specific you'd like me to attend to before they arrive? Whitaker seemed about to say something else, but the doorbell rang, saving Elena from whatever it was. We'll talk more later, he said before going to greet his first guest. The dinner party consisted of Whitaker and 5 guests, 3 men and 2 women, all dripping with wealth and power. Elena recognized one of them as a famous hedge fund manager, whose picture occasionally appeared in the business section of newspapers. Another was a well-known art collector, whose gallery openings were covered by society pages. As Elena served each course, she maintained the perfect balance of being present when needed and invisible when not, a skill she had mastered at Le Ciel. The conversation flowed around her as if she weren't there, touching on subjects that highlighted the vast difference between her world and theirs. Vacation homes in the Hamptons, private jets to Paris for weekend shopping trips, and investments worth millions. James, darling, when did you become such a foodie? Asked one of the women, a blonde in her 40s wearing diamonds that caught the light with every movement of her hands. This dinner is exquisite. I can't take credit, Whitaker replied smoothly. Le Ciel handled everything, including the charming staff. He glanced at Elena as she poured wine, making her feel suddenly self-conscious. Speaking of charm, said one of the men, his speech slightly slurred from the multiple cocktails he'd consumed before dinner. Isn't that a Steinway over there? Someone should play something. Dinner entertainment. I'm afraid I'd butcher anything I attempted, Whitaker said with a self-deprecating smile. My piano teacher, Ms. Reyes, would be horrified at how little of her instruction stuck with me. Elena tensed at the mention of her mother's name, nearly spilling the wine she was pouring. She quickly recovered, but not before Whitaker noticed her reaction. Reyes? Said the art collector, looking thoughtful. Wasn't there a young pianist by that name at Juilliard a few years back? I remember attending a student recital. Extraordinary talent. Elena kept her eyes down, focusing on serving the dessert course with steady hands despite her racing heart. How had the conversation suddenly turned to her? Indeed there was, Whitaker said, his eyes not leaving Elena's face. In fact, we have a connection to that very pianist right here in this room. The table fell silent, everyone looking around in confusion. Elena, Whitaker said, gesturing toward her, would you introduce yourself properly to my guests? Put on the spot, Elena had no choice but to respond. I'm just here to serve dinner, Mr. Whitaker, she said quietly. Elena studied at Juilliard, Whitaker continued as if she hadn't spoken. Her mother was my high school music teacher. Apparently talent runs in the family. The guests all turned to look at her with new interest, making Elena feel like an exotic animal in a zoo. You're a pianist? Asked the blonde woman, sounding genuinely surprised, as if the concept of a server having any life or talent outside of waiting tables was shocking. I was, Elena said shortly. If you'll excuse me, I need to check on the next course. She retreated to the kitchen, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. In the kitchen, she took deep breaths, trying to calm herself. Richard noticed her distress. Everything all right out there? Fine, she said automatically. Just need to prepare the coffee service. When she returned to the dining room with coffee and petit fours, the conversation had moved on to other topics, much to her relief. But as the evening progressed and the wine flowed freely, one of the men, the one who had mentioned the piano earlier, returned to the subject. James, you can't tease us about having a concert pianist serving us dinner and then not have her play something, he said, louder than necessary. I want to hear if she's as good as you implied. Elena froze by the serving table, feeling all eyes turn to her again. That's an excellent idea, said Whitaker, setting down his wineglass. Elena, would you favor us with a piece? I'm here as a server, Mr. Whitaker, Elena said firmly, though her heart was pounding. And I haven't played seriously in years. Oh, come on, urged the blonde woman. Just a little something. It would be such a treat. Elena looked to Richard for help, but he merely gave her a subtle nod, silently telling her to comply with the guest's wishes. The golden rule of Le Ciel, the customer is always right. I'm sorry, but I really couldn't, Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. It's been too long. I'll make it worth your while, Whitaker said suddenly. $5,000 for one piece. A shocked silence fell over the room. $5,000. More than 2 months' rent, enough to cover her mother's latest round of medications with money left over. Elena stared at Whitaker, trying to understand his game. "That's very generous, but unnecessary," she said carefully. 10,000, he countered, a challenge in his eyes. The other guests were watching the exchange with a mixture of amusement and discomfort, as if witnessing an unexpected form of entertainment. "James, you're embarrassing the poor girl," said the art collector, though he looked more intrigued than concerned. "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone," Whitaker replied, his eyes still locked with Elena's. "I'm simply curious if Elena Reyes is still the prodigy her mother believed she was." In that moment, Elena understood what was happening. This hadn't been a coincidence. Whitaker had recognized her name at the restaurant. He had requested her specifically for this dinner. This had been his plan all along, to put her on display for his wealthy friends to see if the waitress could actually play. She should refuse. Walk away with her dignity intact. "But $10,000? One piece," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "And then I return to my duties. And I'd like the payment up front." A smile spread across Whitaker's face, triumphant and yet somehow tinged with something else. Respect, perhaps. He pulled out his checkbook without hesitation and wrote a check, signing it with a flourish before handing it to her. Elena took it, folded it carefully, and placed it in her pocket. Then, removing her serving gloves and straightening her shoulders, she walked toward the piano that had been calling to her since she'd first seen it. As she sat down on the bench, adjusting it to the right height out of long-ingrained habit, she could feel the guests watching her with curious, slightly condescending smiles. They were expecting her to be mediocre, a server playing at being a musician for their amusement. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, letting her fingers rest lightly on the cool ivory keys. It had been so long, and yet her hands remembered. They always remembered. She took a deep breath and began to play. Elena's fingers touched the keys and the world around her faded away. The judgmental stares, the wealthy guests, the embarrassment, all of it disappeared the moment music filled the room. She had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, starting with those famous opening chords, deep, resonant, and powerful. It was a piece she had performed countless times during her years at Juilliard, one that lived in her muscle memory. The notes flowed from her fingers as if she had never stopped playing, as if the past 5 years of serving tables and counting tips had never happened. At first, there was a slight stiffness to her playing, her fingers remembering but slightly rusty from disuse. But within moments something awakened inside her, that part of her soul that had been dormant for too long. The music took over and Elena surrendered to it completely. The conversations in the room stopped instantly. Wine glasses paused midway to lips. The smug expressions on the guests' faces gave way to surprise, then disbelief, and finally awe. Elena didn't see any of this. Her eyes were closed, her body swaying slightly with the music lost in the emotional landscape of the piece. The years of frustration, sacrifice, and buried dreams poured out through her fingers, transforming into something beautiful and heartbreaking. James Whitaker stood frozen by the fireplace, his glass of whiskey forgotten in his hand. This was not what he had expected. He had heard from his mother's colleagues that Elena Reyes had been talented, but this was something else entirely. This wasn't just technical skill, though her technique was flawless. This was raw emotion translated into sound, the kind of playing that reached inside you and squeezed your heart. The blonde woman who had been so condescending earlier now sat with her hand pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with astonishment. The hedge fund manager, who prided himself on his cultural sophistication, looked humbled. The art collector leaned forward in his chair, completely captivated, recognizing true artistry when he saw it. As Elena moved into the more delicate middle section of the piece, her touch became lighter, more tender. Her face, which had been tense with concentration, softened into an expression of pure joy. This was where she belonged, who she was meant to be. Not a server carrying trays and taking orders, but a musician speaking through the piano. In the kitchen, the other servers and Chef Pascal had stopped their work, drawn by the music flowing through the penthouse. Richard stood in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, watching with his mouth slightly open. In all the years he'd known Elena, all the times he'd barked orders at her or criticized her service, He had never imagined she possessed this kind of talent. The piece built toward its climax, Elena's hands flying across the keys with increasing intensity. The grand piano responded to her touch perfectly, its rich tones filling every corner of the penthouse. When she finally reached the thunderous conclusion, her whole body seemed to pour the last of its energy into those final, triumphant chords. Then, silence. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke. The absence of music felt almost painful after what they had just experienced. Elena slowly opened her eyes, returning to reality as if waking from a dream. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted them from the keys, and she felt a tear slide down her cheek. She hadn't realized she'd been crying. The silence broke with a gasp from one of the women, followed by the sound of enthusiastic applause. The guests were on their feet, their faces transformed by genuine emotion, perhaps the first real feeling some of them had experienced in a long time. "My God," said the art collector, his voice thick. "That was extraordinary." Elena stood up from the piano bench, suddenly remembering her role. She was still a server at a dinner party, still wearing her Le Ciel uniform. The check for $10,000 felt heavy in her pocket. "Thank you," she said quietly, smoothing down her skirt and trying to regain her professional composure. "If you'll excuse me, I should get back to serving coffee." "Wait," said Whitaker, stepping forward. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of amazement, confusion, and something that might have been shame. "Elena, I've never heard anything like it." "You've never been to many concerts, then?" she replied, a hint of defiance in her voice. "No, I've been to plenty," he said, shaking his head. "At Carnegie Hall in Vienna and Paris, but that was different, that was real." Elena wasn't sure how to respond. This wasn't how she had expected the evening to unfold. She had anticipated playing something simple, collecting her money and returning to her duties with her dignity somewhat intact. She hadn't planned on pouring her heart out to a room full of strangers who had been mocking her moments before. "I believe I fulfilled my part of the bargain," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Now, if you don't mind, I have a job to do." She turned to walk back toward the kitchen, but was stopped by one of the guests, the older man who had been introduced as Philip Thornton. "The art collector." "Young lady," he said, his expression serious. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Elena shook her head. She recognized his face from magazines, but celebrity names had never been her strong suit. "I'm on the board of the New York Philharmonic," he said, "and I'd like to speak with you about your future." "My future is serving your dessert," Elena replied, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "The kitchen is waiting for me." "No," said Whitaker suddenly. "No, they're not." He turned to Richard, who still stood in the doorway looking stunned. "Your server is done for the evening. She's now my guest." Richard opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. One did not argue with a client who spent as much at Le Ciel as James Whitaker. "Of course, sir," he said, finally nodding to Elena. "We can manage without you." Elena felt a flash of panic. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She needed this job, needed the security of her routine. "Mr. Whitaker, I can't just—" "Please," he said. And for the first time that evening, there was no trace of arrogance in his voice. "Just a simple request. Sit down. Have a glass of wine. Talk to Philip." Reluctantly, Elena allowed herself to be guided to an empty chair at the table. The blonde woman, whose name Elena had now forgotten, poured her a glass of the expensive wine she had been serving all evening. "How long has it been since you played regularly?" asked Philip, his tone gentle but intense. 5 years, Elena replied, feeling strange to be sitting at the table rather than standing beside it. "Since my mother got sick." "And where did you study?" "Juilliard." "For 2 years before I had to withdraw." The table fell silent again. 2 years at Juilliard was no small achievement. To have walked away from that kind of opportunity spoke volumes about the seriousness of her situation. "Your mother, she has MS, doesn't she?" asked Whitaker quietly. Elena looked at him sharply. "How did you know that?" "I made some inquiries after I recognized your name at the restaurant," he admitted. "My assistant did some research." The invasion of privacy should have angered her, but Elena was too emotionally drained to feel anything but resignation. "Yes, she has progressive MS. She can no longer work. And the medical bills," and she trailed off, not wanting to discuss her financial struggles with these people who, would never understand what it meant to choose between paying rent and buying medication. And that's why you're serving tables instead of playing concerts, Philip said. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded, taking a sip of the wine. It was good, better than anything she'd tasted in years, but she barely registered the flavor. That ends tonight, said Philip firmly. Excuse me? Your days as a server. They're over. He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. I'm texting our music director right now. We have an opening next month. One of our pianists had to withdraw from a performance of the Rachmaninoff concerto. The very piece you just played. Elena stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. Mr. Thornton, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I can't just... I have responsibilities. My mother needs care, I have bills to pay, and I haven't practiced seriously in years. The money is not an issue, said Whitaker, leaning forward. Consider it handled. What? Your mother's care, the bills, whatever you need to focus on preparing for the performance. Consider it an investment in your future. Elena looked from Whitaker to Philip and back again, searching for signs that this was some elaborate joke at her expense. But their expressions were deadly serious. Why would you do that? She asked Whitaker, suspicious of his sudden generosity. You don't even know me. Whitaker was quiet for a moment, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Let's just say I'm making amends for a mistake, he said finally. I invited you here tonight to show off to my friends, to use you as entertainment. I thought it would be amusing to see if the waitress could actually play. He looked ashamed now. I didn't expect that what you just did transcended entertainment. It was art, pure and simple, and to think that talent has been wasted serving people like us for 5 years. He shook his head. It's a crime. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to believe this could be real. But years of disappointment and struggle had made her cautious. I can't just abandon my job on the promise of one performance. It won't be just one, said Philip confidently. Once people hear you play, there will be more offers. But even if there weren't, even if it was just this one night, wouldn't it be worth it? To play with a full orchestra on a real stage one more time? Elena felt a longing so intense it was almost physical pain. To return to music, to what she loved most in the world. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream. Think about it, said Philip, sliding his business card across the table to her. Call me tomorrow. We can discuss the details. And your mother's care will be arranged immediately, added Whitaker, regardless of what you decide about the performance. Elena looked down at the 2 business cards in front of her, Philip's and the one Whitaker had given her at the restaurant. Somehow, in the space of an evening, her life had been turned upside down. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, said Philip, but not too much time. We need to begin rehearsals soon if you're going to be ready. As the evening drew to a close, Elena found herself in the strange position of saying goodbye as a guest rather than a server. The other guests, who had barely acknowledged her existence hours earlier, now treated her with respect bordering on reverence. Music, it seemed, was the great equalizer. When everyone had left, Whitaker walked her to the door. I'll have my driver take you home, he said. And Elena, I'm sorry for how this evening began, but I'm not sorry for how it ended. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Neither am I, she said finally. And for the first time in 5 years, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps her music wasn't lost after all. It had just been waiting, like her, for the right moment to return. The next morning, Elena sat at her mother's bedside, trying to explain what had happened at Whitaker's dinner party. Her mother listened with wide eyes, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. $10,000 for one piece? She repeated, looking at the check Elena had placed on the bedside table. And now they want you to play with the Philharmonic? It sounds crazy, I know, Elena said, still not entirely convinced it wasn't all an elaborate dream. Philip Thornton called twice this morning already. He says they need an answer by tomorrow. Her mother reached out with trembling hands to take Elena's. And what will your answer be? Elena sighed, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. I don't know, Mom. It's been so long. And what about your care? I can't just stop working. Didn't this Whitaker man say he would take care of that? Yes, but... Elena hesitated. Can we really trust him? Rich people make grand promises all the time, especially when they're feeling emotional or guilty. What happens when he changes his mind? Her mother squeezed her hands with surprising strength. Elena, listen to me. For 5 years, I've watched you put your life on hold for me. I've seen you come home with aching feet and fake smiles, pretending you're happy when I know you're not. Mom, don't let me finish, her mother insisted. Every time I heard you playing that old keyboard at night when you thought I was asleep, it broke my heart. You were meant for more than this, sweetheart. You were meant for music. Elena felt tears welling up. But what about you? I'm not going anywhere, her mother said with a small smile. And if this Whitaker fellow is offering to help with my care, then take him up on it. If it doesn't work out, you can always go back to serving tables. But this chance? It might never come again. Before Elena could respond, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. Hello? She answered cautiously. Elena? This is James Whitaker. Elena's heart jumped. Mr. Whitaker, I was just discussing your offer with my mother. Good, he said, sounding businesslike. I've taken the liberty of arranging for a home health care service to visit you today. They're the best in the city. They work with several of my executive staff members' families. Elena was speechless for a moment. That's very generous, but it's not generosity, Whitaker interrupted. It's an investment, as I said. I've also set up a trust fund to cover your mother's medical expenses for the next 3 years. The paperwork will be delivered this afternoon for both of you to review. Why are you doing all this? Elena couldn't help asking. One piece of music can't be worth this much trouble. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When I was 17, Whitaker said finally, your mother caught me cheating on a music history test. Instead of failing me, which would have meant I couldn't graduate, she made me come to school early every morning for a month to learn about classical composers. I hated it at first, but by the end I'd developed a real appreciation for music. He paused again. The day before graduation, she gave me a CD of Vladimir Ashkenazy playing Rachmaninoff. She said, music will save you someday, James, remember that? I didn't understand what she meant then. But years later, during the darkest period of my life, I found that CD again, and she was right, it did save me in a way. Elena looked at her mother, who was watching her with curious eyes. I owe Mariela Reyes a debt I can never fully repay, Whitaker continued, but perhaps I can repay it partially by ensuring her daughter gets the chance she deserves. Elena struggled to find words. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, said Whitaker, his tone becoming more brisk. Thank me after your performance. I've reserved a practice studio for you starting tomorrow. 8 hours a day for the next 4 weeks. Are you ready for that kind of schedule? Elena took a deep breath. Yes, I am. Good, my driver will pick you up at 9 tomorrow morning. Oh, and one more thing. I've spoken with Richard at Le Ciel. You're on paid leave until further notice. After the call ended, Elena sat in stunned silence. Her mother watched her face carefully. Well, she prompted. It's really happening, Elena whispered. He's arranged everything. Healthcare for you, a practice studio for me. Mom, I'm going to be playing with the Philharmonic. Her mother's eyes filled with tears of joy. Then you'd better start practicing, hadn't you? The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of intense practice, muscle pain, and rediscovered passion. Elena's fingers, which had grown accustomed to carrying trays and folding napkins, remembered their true purpose. The first few days were painful, physically and emotionally, as she confronted how much ground she had lost during her years away from the piano. But with each passing day, her confidence grew, along with her strength and stamina. The healthcare workers who came to look after her mother were professional and kind, allowing Elena to focus on her music without worrying. Every evening, she would return home exhausted but exhilarated, playing sections of the concerto for her mother, who offered criticism and encouragement in equal measure. Philip Thornton visited the practice studio regularly, sometimes bringing along the conductor or other musicians from the Philharmonic. They worked with Elena patiently, helping her adjust to playing with an orchestra again. There were moments of frustration and doubt, times when Elena wondered if she had taken on too much too soon. But then she would remember that night at Whitaker's penthouse, how the music had flowed through her, how right it had felt, and she would push through the difficulty. James Whitaker kept his distance during this time, seemingly understanding that Elena needed space to prepare without feeling the weight of his expectations. He sent occasional messages through his assistant, checking on her progress and making sure she had everything she needed, but otherwise stayed away. 1 week before the performance, Elena received a package at the practice studio. Inside was a beautiful silk dress in deep blue, concert attire with a note from Whitaker. for your triumphant return. No pressure." The humor made her smile, easing some of the anxiety that had been building as the performance date approached. That same day, Philip brought news that the concert was sold out. Apparently, word had spread about the former Juilliard prodigy, who had been discovered working as a waitress, and the story had captured people's imagination. "They're calling you the Cinderella pianist in some circles," Philip told her with amusement. The media loves a good comeback story. Elena wasn't sure how she felt about becoming a story, about her private struggles being repackaged as an inspirational tale for strangers. But if it filled seats and advanced her career, perhaps it was worth it. The night before the performance, Elena stayed late at the practice studio, playing through the concerto one last time. As she finished, she heard applause from the doorway. James Whittaker stood there, looking much less imposing in casual clothes than he had at his penthouse. "Sorry to intrude," he said. "I wanted to wish you luck for tomorrow." "Thank you," Elena said, closing the piano lid. "For everything," Whittaker shook his head. "I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it." He hesitated, then added, "Your mother would be proud." "She is," Elena said with a smile. "She'll be there tomorrow night. The healthcare service is arranging transportation for her." "Good." Whittaker seemed about to leave, then turned back. "You know, I didn't just invite you to that dinner party on a whim. I'd been following your career since you left Juilliard. I knew who you were the moment I saw you at Le Ciel." Elena stared at him. "What? Why wouldn't you say something? Would you have believed me? A stranger claiming to know your history, offering to help restart your career? Or would you have thought I was just another rich guy with questionable intentions?" Elena had to admit he had a point. "So the dinner party was a setup, yes," Whittaker admitted. "Though not in the way you think. I needed Philip to hear you play, to see your talent for himself. He's not a man easily influenced by others' opinions, but I never expected you to play the way you did." He smiled ruefully. "I thought you'd be good. I didn't know you'd be magnificent." Elena didn't know whether to be angry at his manipulation or grateful for the outcome. "That was a risky game you played with my life." "It was," he agreed. "But sometimes the biggest opportunities come from the riskiest moments. Like tomorrow night." The concert hall was packed the following evening. Elena stood backstage, her heart racing as she listened to the orchestra tuning up. She was wearing the blue dress Whittaker had sent, her hair styled simply but elegantly by a professional sent to her apartment that morning. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see her mother in the front row, looking healthier than she had in months, her face glowing with pride. Beside her sat James Whittaker, unusually subdued in a dark suit. The rest of the audience was a blur of faces, strangers who had come to witness what the program notes called a remarkable musical resurrection. The conductor approached her, breaking into her thoughts. "Ready, Miss Reyes?" Elena took a deep breath, thinking of all that had happened to bring her to this moment, the years of struggle, the night at Whittaker's penthouse, the weeks of intense preparation. She thought of the parallel life she might have led if she had never taken that serving job at Le Ciel, if Whittaker had never recognized her name, if she had never played his piano. "Yes," she said finally, "I'm ready." As she walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, Elena felt a strange sense of coming home. The grand piano waited for her, gleaming under the stage lights. She took her seat, adjusted the bench, and looked up at the conductor. The orchestra began the introduction to Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Elena waited for her cue, her fingers poised above the keys. In that moment of anticipation, she caught her mother's eye in the audience and saw all the love and sacrifice that had brought her here. Then she began to play, and once again, the world fell away. There was only the music, not a performance now, but a conversation between her, the orchestra, and every person in the audience. A conversation about loss and discovery, about dreams deferred but not abandoned, about second chances. Elena played with her whole heart, not for the critics or the audience or even for Whittaker, who had made this night possible. She played for her mother who had given up so much for her, and she played for herself, for the girl who had once believed that music could change lives because sometimes, in the most unexpected ways, it could. 3 years had passed since that life-changing night at the Philharmonic. Elena stood at the window of her apartment, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Not the same tiny apartment in Queens where she had once struggled to pay rent, but a spacious one-bedroom with large windows and, most importantly, room for a baby grand piano. The morning sun glinted off the polished black surface of the instrument, a gift from the Philharmonic after her first full season as their featured soloist. On the wall hung framed posters from her performances around the country, alongside a few international tour dates. A shelf held various awards and a collection of glowing reviews that her mother had carefully clipped and preserved. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her agent, confirming details for her upcoming recording session. Even after 3 years, she sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was really her life. The door to the second bedroom opened, and her mother emerged, moving slowly but steadily with the help of a walker. The advanced treatments that Whitaker had arranged access to hadn't cured her MS, but they had slowed its progression significantly, giving her better quality of life than they dared hope for. "Big day today?" her mother asked, making her way to the kitchen where Elena had already prepared tea. "Just finalizing some details for next week's recording," Elena replied, helping her mother into a chair. "How did you sleep?" "Well enough," her mother said with a small smile. "I was remembering your father last night. How he used to dance with you standing on his feet when you were little." "Before he left." Elena nodded, memories of her father bittersweet but no longer painful. So much had changed in 3 years, including her ability to look back at her life with perspective rather than regret. The buzzer rang, and Elena checked her watch. "That'll be Dr. Chen for your checkup," she said, pressing the intercom to let the doctor in. As her mother had her weekly examination, Elena retreated to the piano, playing softly, not practicing, just enjoying the feel of the keys beneath her fingers. The joy of playing had never diminished, not through countless rehearsals, performances, and recording sessions. If anything, it had grown stronger with time and freedom from financial worry. Her phone rang, interrupting her reverie. The screen showed a name that still gave her mixed feelings. James Whitaker. "James," she answered, her tone friendly but reserved. Their relationship had evolved over the years into something like friendship, though Elena had never fully forgotten how their paths had first crossed. "Elena," he replied, "I hope I'm not interrupting your practice." "Not at all. Just playing around." She paused. "How's Tokyo?" "Busy. The tech conference went well, but I'm ready to come home." There was a brief silence. "Have you thought about my proposal?" Elena sighed. This had been a point of contention between them for months. "I have, and my answer is still the same. I appreciate the gesture, but I don't need your foundation to endow a scholarship in my name." "It wouldn't be in your name only," Whitaker said, a hint of frustration in his voice. "It would honor your mother, too. The Mariella and Elena Reyes Scholarship for musicians facing financial hardship or family health crises. Think of how many talented people are in the exact situation you are in, forced to choose between their gift and their family responsibilities." Elena ran her fingers along the edge of the piano. "I understand that, and it's a worthy cause. She hesitated. "You just don't want to be further obligated to me." Whitaker finished for her. "After all this time, you still see me as the rich guy who tried to humiliate you at a dinner party." "That's not fair," Elena protested, though there was some truth to his words. "I'm grateful for everything you've done. You know that. But I've worked hard to build my career on my own terms, to be known for my music rather than my story. A scholarship with my name attached to yours just feels like going backward instead of forward," Whitaker supplied. "Something like that." He was quiet for a moment. "What if it wasn't my foundation? What if it was entirely funded by the proceeds from your performances and recordings? Your story, your money, your decision about who receives help. This was a new angle. You'd step back completely?" "Completely," he confirmed. "I'd provide the initial organizational structure through my contacts, but after that it would be yours to direct. No strings, no Whitaker name anywhere near it." Elena considered this. She had been fortunate enough to achieve not just artistic success but financial security as well. Her recordings sold well, her concerts frequently sold out, and she had even composed some original pieces that had been well received by critics and audiences alike. The idea of using that success to help others in situations similar to her past struggles was appealing. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Properly this time. That's all I ask, Whitaker replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I'll be back in New York next week. Perhaps we could discuss it over dinner? Somewhere decidedly not my penthouse, Elena laughed. All right. But I choose the restaurant. Deal. After they hung up, Elena sat thinking about how dramatically her life had changed. The memory of that night at Whitaker's penthouse still felt vivid. The humiliation turning to triumph, the sudden reversal of fortune that had set her on this path. She had once viewed Whitaker's intervention in her life with suspicion and resentment, even while accepting the opportunities it created. Now, with time and perspective, she could see that what had begun as his attempt at entertainment had transformed into genuine respect and eventually friendship. Dr. Chen emerged from the bedroom, interrupting her thoughts. Everything looks stable, she reported. The new medication seems to be working well. I've left the updated prescription information with your mother. Thank you, doctor, Elena said, walking her to the door. Same time next week? After the doctor left, Elena returned to the kitchen where her mother was sipping tea, looking thoughtful. That was James on the phone? Her mother asked. Yes. He's still pushing for that scholarship idea. Her mother nodded slowly. And you're still resisting? Not resisting exactly, Elena said, sitting down across from her. Just cautious. Because you're afraid people will think you didn't earn your success on your own. Elena looked up, surprised by her mother's perception. Maybe, partly. Sweetheart, her mother said gently, no one succeeds entirely on their own. Everyone gets help along the way, some more dramatically than others perhaps, but that's life. What matters is what you do with the opportunities you're given. And you think I should do this? Create this scholarship? I think you should ask yourself, what would have helped you most during those difficult years? Then do that for someone else. Her mother reached across the table to take her hand. You've proven yourself 100 times over. Your talent speaks for itself. No one who hears you play could ever doubt that you deserve every success you've achieved. Elena squeezed her mother's hand, grateful as always for her wisdom. I'll think about it. Later that afternoon, Elena had a meeting at Juilliard where she now taught master classes several times a month. Walking through the familiar halls brought back memories of her student days. The excitement, the pressure, the sense of belonging to something greater than herself. She passed a practice room where a young woman was playing a piece by Chopin, her face intent with concentration. Elena paused to listen, recognizing both great potential and the kind of technical issues that came from stress and overwork. After the girl finished, Elena knocked gently on the door. That was beautiful, she said. But you're pushing too hard in the middle section. Your shoulders are too tense. The student looked up, her eyes widening with recognition. Ms. Reyes? Thank you, Elena smiled. May I? She asked, gesturing to the piano. The student nodded eagerly, moving aside to make room on the bench. Elena sat down and demonstrated the passage, explaining how to achieve the desired effect without straining. You're preparing for the spring showcase? Elena asked as she finished. Trying to, the student replied, looking down at her hands. But I might have to withdraw. Why? Your playing is certainly at the required level. The young woman hesitated. My dad lost his job. They're talking about selling the house, and my scholarship only covers tuition, not living expenses. I've been working nights at a coffee shop, but it's affecting my practice time, and... She stopped, embarrassed. I'm sorry. You don't need to hear all this. Elena felt a jolt of recognition so strong it was almost physical. Actually, she said slowly, I understand better than you might think. They talked for nearly an hour. The student's name was Lucia, and her situation echoed Elena's past in ways that seemed almost uncanny. Talented, dedicated, but caught between her musical aspirations and her family's needs. By the time Elena left for her scheduled masterclass, she had made a decision. That evening, she called Whitaker back. I've been thinking about the scholarship, she said without preamble. And? He prompted. I want to do it, but not just for pianists. For all music students facing financial hardship due to family health issues or other circumstances beyond their control. Excellent, Whitaker said, sounding pleased. I'll have my team start drawing up the paperwork. And I want the first recipient to be someone specific, Elena continued. A student I met today. Her situation. It's very familiar. Consider it done. Anything else? Elena took a deep breath. Yes, I'd like to give a benefit concert to launch the foundation. And I want to premiere a new piece, something I've been composing about my journey, about second chances. I'd be honored to attend, Whitaker said softly. 6 months later, Elena stood on the stage of Carnegie Hall, looking out at a full house. In the front row sat her mother, beaming with pride, and beside her James Whitaker, who had become an unexpected ally and friend. Scattered throughout the audience were faces from her past and present. Richard from Lucille, Philip Thornton from the Philharmonic, Miguel and other former co-workers, and Lucia, the first recipient of the Reyes Family Scholarship. As Elena prepared to play her new composition, she thought about the strange, winding path that had brought her here, the years of struggle, the night of humiliation turned triumph, the hard work and good fortune that had followed. She thought about how a moment meant to embarrass her had instead revealed her true self to the world, and, in many ways, to herself. The piece she was about to play told that story, not in words, but in the language she had always understood best. It spoke of loss and discovery, of hands that remembered their purpose even when life pulled them in other directions, of the ways in which people could surprise you, including yourself. As her fingers touched the keys for the opening notes, Elena felt a sense of completion. The journey from that dinner party to this stage had not been easy or straightforward. There had been setbacks and doubts, moments of frustration and fear. But looking back, she wouldn't change any of it, not even the painful parts, because they had all led her here, to this moment of creating something new in the world. The music flowed from her hands, telling her story to everyone who would listen. And as she played, Elena knew with absolute certainty that she had found her way home.